Welcome to Failure to Stop. I'm Drew Breezy. As you know, this is the #1 channel where police meet society and culture. We have a brand new project underfoot. It's called Patreon. We figured we'd kick it off with a big guest. This is a show that's going to be my little corner of the earth. It's kind of called The Rest of the Story. That's the intent anyway. We're going to talk to Rob Hollingsworth, who has started a foundation, or rather a collective known as Plant Your Flag. Rob, how are you?
I'm great. Excited to be here. Excited for the startup and to get back to some of the officers that are potentially leaving the field.
If you're anything like me, you understand that once you leave the field, it doesn't mean that if the field leaves you, that law enforcement is a calling. And oftentimes, all the people that I've associated with over the past probably year or so since my retirement, I've noticed have a greater impact on the profession now that they're out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Probably simply because we can say whatever the fuck we're thinking, and
Exactly.
which kind of leads us to the conversation we're going to have today. Rob is a University of Louisville alum. Just I went to the Southern Police Institute at University of Louisville, so I am somewhat of a Cardinal myself. By proxy, I guess. You spent 4 years, more or less, as a K-9 handler, EOD in the U.S. Navy. Is that right?
Yep.
And then 3 years as a police officer in Henderson, Nevada. There was something that's significant that took place. We're going to talk a little bit about. Then about 3 years, more or less, in the Tacoma PD, where you had quite an ending, quite a crescendo to the career in Tacoma. And currently, for the last year, you've been working on Plant Your Flag. So let's get into it. Let's fill in some of these blanks. Your Navy career gave you the unique opportunity of learning leadership skills. Did they translate well into law enforcement?
Yeah, I think I've always been like a goal-oriented person. And the Navy, I was fortunate. So working a dog, you're kind of like on your own, which is pretty rare in the military. Usually it's pretty structured, which it, of course, had that. But I was kind of given like free leash, to, so to speak, pun intended. So kind of you work on your own, which in law enforcement is the same thing. So I actually got hired only a couple weeks out of the military into Vegas. So it was just an easy transition for me. That being in that kind of work as well goes hand in hand.
So did you find it beneficial that the Navy, I'm sure, is just like any other branch of the service, just like law enforcement. It's a lot of chop busting and just camaraderie, but that's actually what keeps us coming back, more or less. Like, I mean, the saying that I hear time and time again from the retirees or the people that have left the field. I miss the monkeys, but I don't miss the circus.
Yeah.
Do you get that feeling?
Yeah, I think so. And I was kind of used to that already, just growing up playing sports, I think, playing football, wrestling, baseball. So you already have a little bit of that. Obviously, it's not to that level or degree, but I think it's all relative.
There was a full circle in there somewhere. You actually grew up in the Pacific Northwest. Is that correct?
Yeah. I grew up in a little town called Bellingham, Washington. Good place to raise a family when I grew up. Not so much anymore. And then I left the military. Ended up in Vegas. Obviously, I was there for 3 years, and then shortly after the Route 91 shooting, about a year after that, I moved back. Vegas just didn't seem like a good place to raise a family, so we're like, all right, let's go back. Started doing research on departments to work to in Washington. I knew it would be a little bit different, but I didn't see the total collapse that was coming. I went up there in 2019, and then 2020, when everything changed, it became a place not to raise a family. So that was one of the reasons I left.
I'm hearing a couple common themes every time you bring up a place where you work. It's not a good place to raise a family. So obviously the importance is raising a family, and you're successfully doing that now that you're away from the job. Do you find benefit in walking away from a career in law enforcement to give you the latitude to be able to be kind of your own boss?
Oh yeah, there's so many different things I could talk about. I was having this conversation with an officer, a friend of mine who's in Vegas last night, and he's like, dude, I admire, like, you don't let anybody else dictate your life. I love law enforcement. I like the structure, but I also have like an entrepreneurial type, like, well, I'm kind of limited here, and who are you to tell me what to do? Because I have one life to live. And especially if your leadership sucks or you're impeding my life and my family, then I have a tendency to bet on myself and say, all right, I'm going to do better and I'm going to go do something else. I'm never stuck, which I talk about that on Plant Your Flag, is like a lot of these officers are pegging themselves and quartering themselves into a little box, and they can't get out of it, or they feel that they can't get out of it, and they're just miserable. So that's what I'm trying to encourage them to move on from.
Everything you say rings so true with me. I was very fortunate in that somehow I made it. Like I made it through to my retirement, but what you're saying resonates with me. I'm the exact same way. Like maybe not to a fault, but maybe it's just the creatives or the critical thinkers that, we're not meant to be tied down, or
Yeah.
we're not meant to maybe answer to a boss, and it's no fault of the bosses, and it's no. But
Yeah.
you know what? The other thing of it is too, I recognize bullshit when I see bullshit, and sometimes I'm not afraid to call it out. I also found kind of a freedom in being able to talk about it a little bit more freely now that I'm away from it. However, not having to. Like I think I'm a little bit happier just putting it behind me. Do you
Yeah,
find
and
the same experience?
you said the phrase "made it through," and I mean, my hat's off to you for doing such a long career, but I was like, I found myself getting in that, and then when I was always in, I hear officers saying, "Well, I'm over this bullshit. What else can I do? What else can I make this much money doing this, and this?" I mean, I made good money in Tacoma, well into six figures, and so for me to take like a audacious approach to say, I'm done with this crap, I'm gonna go do something else, I'll humbly say, like, that's a big decision, especially with 3 young kids and a wife. I get it. So but I didn't want to say, oh, I made it through. I would hear that all the time, and I'm like, dude, that's not me. I love the job too. I mean, that's not that. It's just what it's become in the trajectory.
There's no question that the picture's even clearer now that I'm away from it.
Right.
Like I don't know that I would recommend people getting into it. It's just until things stabilize or until things change a little bit. And I say I made it through, not to say that anyone else didn't. I just think that generationally, I think we were convinced, just like you're talking about a minute ago, Rob, we were convinced that this is the only path you have in life. And if you don't stick with this, you're screwed. And I'm telling you, right in the middle of my career, call it a blessing or a curse, I had a life-changing event that involved nearly being arrested. It was a drinking and driving incident and I was not arrested for, but it changed my whole approach to mental health. It changed my approach to addiction. It changed a lot of things. I was nearly fired. I didn't know if I was going to have a job or not. The biggest thing that it taught me, though, was you're replaceable at any point, at any time. There is no one in that department that isn't replaceable.
Yeah. And I was also having this conversation recently. It's like, I understand that too. Like, you're running a business, an organization, so I completely get it. But when it comes down to somebody putting in their life and putting their family through the ringer, risking their life, getting shot at, all the stresses and the traumas that come with it, for them to say, oh, so-and-so's retired, please afford him the services of a normal citizen. We thank him for his service. And then they're out the door and there's no resources, and they cast you out, especially if you do only a few years and you don't retire, or you do 20 years and you're 40 years old. What are you going to do? They don't give you any resources. And so after I transitioned out, I said, oh, I saw this in too, and having go through like a mini process in the military. It's called TAPS, which is just pretty pathetic. I said, well, we clearly need these resources for officers to get out. And so that's why I started implementing this into Plant Your Flag. It's certainly needed. And departments, my goal would be to have departments come on and say, hey, we want to put this in front of our officers. Like, it's not encouraging people to leave law enforcement. It's for people that are retiring, or they're saying, I'm done, now's the time to get out, which in turn is better for the department, the community, and the other officers and the individual. Because if you're done and shut down, which a lot of these guys are, you're not operating properly and you're not providing the best service.
I am thankful that I had a lot of great mentors where I worked, and I kept in touch with a lot of them, and they prepared me for what I was about to endure in retirement. They helped me with my transition. I don't think that I would have gone as quietly as I did had I not, because it's a newfound freedom. So it's like a new toy you get to play with. We're stifled. I was stifled for 29 years, so to speak. I mean, yeah, I had a couple social media accounts, and I was always pushing it, though. I was and all I was doing was speaking the truth. I don't think that I was out of line, but there were a talking to or two that I got about, hey man, you got to be really careful. And I'm still thinking, no, I don't. If we're trying to humanize the badge, as we always say, Don't people really need to know who I am? But the problem is, like, defense attorneys use this information in proceedings and try to paint you into a different picture. So I commend the organization that you have. We're going to talk extensively about it in a second, hopefully. But transitioning out of this profession is something that the profession itself desperately needs. Especially, you're right. If an agency can have their, it could be a one-stop shop for maybe a debrief from the person to kind of see where the agency can improve, and we can also transition the cop back into society quietly, so they can let go of some of that resentment and anger. I think that everybody could benefit from that. So I'm glad you're working on what you're working on. You've mentioned a few times that you worked for the Henderson PD. What happened on 1 October back with Route 91?
Yeah, so we had family friends that went to the 3-day long festival. I went to work. My shift started at 10, but we wouldn't hit the road till 10:40. I think that shooting popped off like right at 10, give or take a couple minutes.
10:02 or so.
Yeah, and so my sergeant answers the phone in front of the room, and we're just sitting in there just shooting the shit or whatever. And I was like, this is weird. And he goes, "Shooter at Mandalay Bay, go." So we all just hightailed it. I called my wife, who was having a scheduled C-section 3 days later. And so I call her running code on the freeway. I go, "Hey, I don't know what's going on, but I'm going here." Our friends didn't end up going that night, which was good. A couple of other officers, they had their kids down there, or they were there. I know the Las Vegas Metro officer that got killed. I met him a couple times. Good, solid dude, Army veteran, good cop. So he took around. He was there as a concert goer, started helping people. But yeah, then we transitioned to like working blood banks and stuff like that. For me, it was, and then, the carryover, like being in that valley, and Vegas actually has a pretty small hometown feel. It's kind of odd. But it was just like the life was sucked out of the valley. And then we had the baby. Then some news crew had a dude that got all shot up in a wheelchair at the hospital to do an interview with him. And I'm glad the guy's alive, but they bring him into like the maternity ward for the interview. And I was just like, that's just distasteful. So I said, hey, like, nothing against the guy, do this somewhere else. Like, we're welcoming life. So it was just kind of just another one of the icky ones. But there was a bunch of gnarly murder, suicides and stuff in Henderson. It was very violent. I got in a shooting in 2018, a robbery suspect. And I mean, Henderson was good, much better department than working up in Tacoma. Leadership was better. It kind of started to tip off, which, whatever. I'm over it. But yeah, I even considered going back after Tacoma fell through the roof.
So, 58 dead, 850 injured. I'm sure that there was you were seeing your share of, at the blood banks or treatment facilities, and now you being in a hospital because your wife had just, given birth, and it's all around you. Did you find that the tragedies and here's where I'm going with this point, Rob. I figured once I left law enforcement, I would leave law enforcement, and I feel like I'm safe in my home. I don't have to leave if I don't want. The problem is, I had a lot of time on my hands to start kind of reliving some of this stuff. We're processing it because we're masters at compartmentalizing it, almost as good as the dispatchers are. Believe it or not, the dispatchers are amazing at compartmentalizing traumatic events. But so did you find yourself processing a lot more even when you moved on to Tacoma?
So for me, I thought I handled all that stuff pretty well. I never had Route 91 I had to drive back. So I worked on the east part of the valley, lived on the west part of the valley, strips in the middle. And so when I left to go home that afternoon, I had to drive back past Mandalay Bay in my truck. And then I could see the curtains flying out the window. From the hotel room. Like that's like that dude in the wheelchair, and then that's ingrained in my head.
Sure.
Like that's stuff people are like, well, it's not the carnage necessarily, it's that.
Yeah, no. There's going to be a trigger. There's somewhere.
In 6 years of policing, I don't want to say seen it all, but I'm gonna name type something. I've responded to it.
I get it, yeah.
But yeah, compartmentalizing. So when I got out, and actually this was probably 6-7 months after I got out, you just subconsciously start opening doors in your head, and you're like, what the hell is that? Because it's very hard to explain. But yeah, basically it came down to a point where I was like, I don't know what the hell's going on in my mind. because you kind of take your stress down, but you still have it, but you're not so like, I still feel like a cop. I'm sure maybe you feel the same way.
Sure do. Yeah.
Like I don't like I walk around and act like it, but I still feel like I'm a cop. I think you're always going to, and I think as one of the treatment stuff with PTSD is like, this is there, so just approach it differently. So doors started opening in my mind, and I was like, I told my wife, I said I need help, so I reached out to therapist. So I was doing that, some EMDR stuff. And then I actually came across an organization called 220 on LinkedIn who were partnered with there. And I went on their treatment, and in one session, night and day different, which is absolutely crazy to me.
So was it anything in particular? Or was it the EMDR that helped you process more, or is it just a combination of the thing of it all? Or and I know I'm giving you like 15 choices, multiple choices here, but do you think there may be a part of it that the surrender of like, man, I thought I handled this shit well. Actually, I don't. And it's okay that I don't.
I think it's a little bit of both. The EMDR I did it a couple times. It was kind of weird. Like my body, on Route 91, for an example, like when I'll do a high stress situation, I'll get like adrenaline dumps and my ears and stuff will just turn bright red. Like that's how I process that. Well, EMDR, like my back started doing that. Like 10 minutes into the session. It was really weird. 220 is not EMDR. They actually use a different protocol, but I was going to talk about this. So what they'll do is they'll get your base levels over the phone. So she'll call you and she'll ask you questions and you just rate it like 1 through 10 or 1 through 4. I forget what it is. And then she'll tally it up, and it's on PTSD, anxiety, and depression. So 3 different scores. Anxiety and depression, I had like trace amounts, like any person would, just like normal levels. PTSD, and this is the scary part, was a 63 out of an 80 scale.
Wow.
To me, I'm like, okay, that's obviously it's higher than 3 on the other one, right? But so I go, well, what does that mean? And she goes, well, anything over 33, that's where combat related PTSD is. Wow. And I was like, I'm double. Mind you, I also was like, I think I need to talk to somebody, but I'm not. Like, I was never suicidal. So then they say anything over that, at 70, you're considered suicidal. And I'm like, well, I'm not that. But it was like an eye-opening thing for me, because I said, there's going to be so many officers right now and military guys walking around at that level, and they don't even have a clue because you're desensitized to it. You're like numb to it. Right when she said that, I was like, yeah, I need to talk about that. I need to get some people going on through this stuff, because 63, where it's like when you first start working as a cop and you're in field training and you go to a larceny and it's like, oh my God, this is terrifying. Like, what am I going to do? And you're all stressed out, versus you do a few years on and you're like, oh shoot, okay, we'll go handle this, and your threshold comes down or goes up. So it's
the accumulation, the accumulation of the trauma. I'm sure that there's a young officer out there that's listening to you and me that's thinking, yeah, I mean, the first couple were pretty bad, but it gets easier and easier and easier, but they don't realize how much it's kind of filling up the bucket. It may seem like it's getting easier, but there's going to be a point, maybe a tipping point, or you're going to start noticing at home that you're a little bit shorter with your spouse, or maybe you're not afraid of that extra, 3 or 4 beers, or, you know what I mean? Like, or you've let your physical fitness go to the wayside, so you quit running and now your shirts don't fit like they used to, and it manifests itself in some different ways, and people I don't think get that. The thing, we had a guy looking at PTSD years ago in my agency, and very pragmatic kind of approach he was using, and don't hold me to the numbers, but if there were 2,000 law enforcement officers and only 10% of them, we say only 10% of them suffered from PTSD, that's 200. So 200 of them is an entire district. So an entire patrol district is suffering from PTSD. 20% of the cops on the street are suffering from PTSD. And that leads to, it could lead to many things: itchy trigger fingers, or not wanting to be re-traumatized. So they don't, like your sensitivity is a little bit higher. I mean, there are just so many things that could lead to. So an organization like yours, Plant Your Flag, is going to help with the transition. It could help with the cops that are currently there, though. But at least to even in the grassroots to spread the word that this mental health thing is not a buzzword, and I think that a lot of agencies treat it as such. I mean, they're able to use it as a bargaining chip, maybe.
Check the box.
To check the box and to say, whoa, we do that. But in reality, they punish the officers into oblivion over stupid small stuff. Have you run into that in other agencies that you worked in?
Well, I think yes, but I also think a large part of that is just the stigma from the officer's perspective. And I was just as guilty of it too. It's like, oh, I don't need any help, which you might not at that time. Maybe you don't, but you're also desensitized. And I think this is the scary part to go off of what I was talking about earlier. Imagine an officer, like say me. So say they have 10 years of public service. They get out and they're like in their early 30s. They still have plenty of work. Like I got my master's degree because I wanted to promote and become like a captain or above. And I'm not choosing this over my family. I'm not going to do it. But take that guy and he says, I can't do this shit anymore. But what if he has the lack of motivation or I call it the black hole effect, where he's just sucked into that negative environment and everybody else, every stimulus he gets at work, because he only hangs out with cops. And I'm guilty of this. This is why I'm saying it. And they say, well, you can't do that. Like, what else are you going to do to make $100,000 or whatever? And he takes on that mindset, coupled with PTSD and lack of sleep and all this stuff. Doesn't work out. Maybe he gets fired because he fuck something up, or maybe he's like, okay, I'm going to get out. Well, then you take him and he has unchecked mental health issues, no network because cops are told to stay off of social media. He has lots of life skills, doesn't know how to put them onto paper, nobody helping him, and everything's negative in his life. And then when you leave, you remove him from that situation. And that was what he had. That's what he identifies. He's like, I'm a police officer. All my friends are cops. Well, then you'll only have a couple of those guys in that profession still talking to you. So now you're losing your identity, your community, basically everything about you. And you say, hey, go out and try to do this. Go start a business. Go get into a new career.
Spread your wings. Yeah.
It's a failure. So now he has all this. He might even be suicidal or depressed. And then he starts failing and failing and failing and failing. And nobody's there to lift him up and help him. You can't tell me that guy doesn't have a higher propensity to commit suicide.
You're 1,000% right, because think about too, I mean, even from a monetary standpoint, if somebody is fired from their job, they don't have medical benefits anymore. And how are you going to get rid of this unresolved PTSD that the job itself created? Like, I can tell you honestly, for probably a good solid 10 years of my career, I slept with a pager. This is how long ago it was. I slept with a pager next to me or a cell phone next to me at night. I never turned it off. I was on call 24/7, 365, whether I was on vacation or not.
Yep.
And that wears on you. And I know that's carried, in some form. I was that way even, after I'd left detective world and, I was a supervisor or whatever. I mean, you're available by email, you're available, like you're always on. And then one day it all goes away and you can't shut it off. And it's even worse. You're right. If it's taken away. So like we talk about 3 Tacoma police officers, Matthew Collins, Christopher or Shane Burbank, and Timothy Rankin, who were indicted in Tacoma just while you were there, pretty much. Yeah. Is that helpful in the decision of whether you're going to transition out of law enforcement or not when guys start getting indicted just for doing their jobs?
So those are all 3 very great dudes, all military veterans of the Army. I replaced one of them on the SWAT team because he got arrested. And so mind you, that was, I forget the date of it, March of 2020, I believe
it was. Yeah, March 3rd, 2020.
Yeah. And then they basically, for political reasons, they try to make it into a George Floyd 2.0 after those guys had already been cleared, by the way, and were out on the road. So they got put on admin leave twice. The second time was from the governor and the mayor. Mind you, at this time, I'm already every other cop was dealing with in 2020. It was exponentially worse in the Seattle area where I was. And I'm thinking, well, I get paid well. I'll just go to work and not do anything, which is what I did because I'm like, I'm not going to get arrested or like shot for no reason. about a year, I knew it was coming too. They've been on admin leave for over a year. I was like, they're going to get charged. This is a political witch hunt. The attorney general's office is doing it. I told my wife, I go, they get charged, we're done. And they did. So that day I was like, all right, we're out of here. And I was still considering staying in law enforcement though. We were looking into Texas or going back to Vegas. But I didn't want to start over again. I've been on graveyard for 10 years. I'm like, yeah, I think I'm good. Yeah. Then at the time I had 2 young kids, and yeah, it just wasn't in the cards for me. So instead of doing it, like, I'm gonna do something else. So I'm gonna work for myself and start working on. I put my life, like, blood, sweat, and tears into law enforcement, even leading up to becoming a cop, as 10 plus years school and military and all that stuff to pad my resume in order to get hired. Because I applied to Las Vegas Metro in 2009 when they weren't hiring cops back then. They had like 6 spots. Now they're begging for cops. What has changed?
I was gonna say, could you imagine that being now?
Yeah,
they're begging for people.
Crazy. So people don't understand it, but
you wrote a great article. You had SWAT dreams, and then it just it was kind of a check-in from where you were a year ago.
Yeah.
First of all, where can people find the article? But second of all, talk a little bit about it.
I posted it on my LinkedIn. So just Rob Hollingsworth on LinkedIn. It's on my Instagram. There's a link on there. It was for Law Enforcement Today, which I'll be doing his show tomorrow. But yeah, you can go to Rob Hollingsworth. I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. There's also links to Plant Your Flag on there, which we're rolling out now. So that's my goal, is to build that and just kind of get, even if it's, one person that is like, oh yeah, please help me. Because I already have a few that I'm helping to see the light. And I'm not encouraging guys to get out of law enforcement. Like, that's the easy, that's what they're going to do. Oh, he's encouraging. No, that's not what I'm doing. Like, if you're getting out or you're retiring, let's just help you. And at the end of it, it's like, this will help police suicide. It just will. Like I explained earlier, you just can't expect them to succeed with what we're doing. And it's just pathetic. And I've always, when you started the show talking about being private and being able to say what we want, I think private, like, I've always had that outlook. Like, I think the private sector could do stuff better than government, because you don't have to go through all the hoops and watch what you say and all this stuff. It's like, hey, no, this is what works. This is what doesn't. If you don't believe me, go do what you think and come back at me in 6 months and try it again. It's like, and I'm not telling like people, it's learn from all of my successes. It's like, hey, learn from my failures just as much. It's like, hey, dude, you probably don't want to do that. You don't want to get spun up and looking 14 different ways. You want to have a focus. So that's what we're doing. Is like, hey, what is your vision? What is your focus? What do you want to do? Now let's work it backwards, so you could exit out and you're already going. So we have retreats and stuff we're going to fire up like quarterly, where you just get 10 to 20 officers that are all about to get out or just separated, and you immediately put them into a new community where they're bouncing ideas off each other and helping each other out. You don't know what kind of connections are and I didn't know this stuff about networking, the power of networking, until I got out.
You describe it as a community-led environment, but we all have these unique and individual skills that we developed from law enforcement, by the way. Like, you talk a lot about SMART goals, and, those are leadership principles that I always employed and followed, by the way. I mean, I found a lot of success, and I like what you say about don't just follow the success listen to the bad things that I've done too. And I can share a story too about overcoming them. In this transitional period, I agree with you, would benefit society, would benefit the cops. How can we find more information about Plant Your Flag?
The website is www.pyftribe, so plantyourflagtribe.com. And then, of course, the links on my social medias, Rob Hollingsworth, on Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram. We're going to hopefully be rolling it out with some other organizations, even some nonprofits that are interested in talking about sending officers towards us that they could sponsor, because it does cost us money and it does take up my time. It's funny because this is the negativity mindset that a lot of these guys are battling, and it's pretty affordable. It's like $49 a month. Like, if you're not willing to pay that to better yourself, because trust me, I spent probably $15,000 last year on mentorship coaching for myself. But people are like, well, you can't charge. It's like, I can charge whatever I want, because it's my time. You can't dictate what my time is worth.
Exactly.
But at the same time, I'm doing it to help people. But it's like, hey, let's just try to keep this affordable and reasonable, and not be cops are immediately going to cast people out as D-bags. because I did the same thing. That's what you got to work with, but we'll get them over the hump.
I've noticed too, in maturity and through experience and through doing this, like you should be setting your worth to begin with. And that's probably, if I had to guess, whether it was subconscious or if you consciously thought about it, it's probably another reason why you got out. Like I know my worth. I mean, if you're not going to listen to my opinions, or you think I'm an asshole, or you're going to try to find a way to move around me to not listen to what I have to say, then okay, I'll give it to somebody else. Somebody else will benefit for it. But I'm in control of my worth. You're not going to tell me that what I have to say doesn't merit it just because it hurts your ego in some way, shape, or form. So I commend you on the organization and its benefits, and certainly I don't think you should feel guilty one bit about it.
I don't.
You're a consultant. You're a consultant at this point. You set your price, and they'll pay. And you're right. Like, listen, if it's about self-improvement, you're going to, so you'll pay $60 for a gym membership, or you'll pay a bar tab for $85 for a night out drinking, but you're worried about this $49 for a wellness program that's going to help you transition into the community. It's going to help you transition, or it's going to help you network, which is even bigger. And it's going to give you a little piece of just about every other officer that's around you that's in the same boat as you. I commend the organization, and certainly would love to help in any way I can.
Absolutely.
So
even take it down a step further and bring in like nutritionists and physical fitness professionals. So it's like, hey, I might have some knowledge in that. If I do, I'll provide it. If not, I have somebody I'm partner with, and here you go. And then we get discounted rates or even free because we've paid for programs and stuff that are available to people. Yeah, it might be only $49, but you're getting thousands of dollars worth of benefit to everybody. So,
I don't want to turn this into like a big sales pitch, but I think a lot of people, this is the beauty of watching Shark Tank. Listen, you can hold out and tell those sharks, look, I'm not going to give you 40% of my company. That's just not going to happen. Or you could give them 40% of your company and make 50 times what you were going to make anyway. Like, sometimes you just got to move your pride aside a little bit and pay out a little money, and understand too, that if you look down the checklist of PTSD symptoms, just to wrap it up with a little bow here, you'll see that you're apprehensive, or you're calling these cops douchebags, or you're doing all this other things as a byproduct of your trauma. You don't want to be re-traumatized, so you're overly, sensitive to certain things, or you don't want to take that leap, or you think that you need to be in a safe shelter at all times. And this all lends to keeping you under wraps, keeping you down, and keeping you thinking there is no other profession but this one.
It's the black hole effect. That's what
we know the difference.
You're like stuck, and you're sucked in there, and you take on this mindset, and you have to fight like hell to get out of it. And unfortunately, I learned this the hard way. You got to cut ties with people that are toxic. Like, keep them at a safe distance, because some people, and they'll come around, I hope, and it's like, you have that mindset and you're stuck in it. Please don't sell your soul before it's too late. I got a buddy that killed himself last year, and I don't know what he's going through, but I think he lost his identity because he couldn't do what he loved doing on the SWAT team. And then, I don't know what he's going through, man, but I just, one's too many. I think we could do better. And I think, to me, this is the answer. Obviously, that's why I started the company, but
it's a multi-pronged approach. I'm telling you, like, the number of people that I talk to outside of law enforcement that were in law enforcement that are doing something similar but completely different, but we all have the same goals, because we all see the same thing. Like, this mass exodus is not just a bunch of disgruntled, pissed off I mean, this is societal. This is pressure from mainstream media. It's pressure from social media. And who in God's name is going to put up with this? I mean, who's going to protect you tomorrow? So, like, I think if we all work together and we all do our little part on the outside, I think we can all benefit. Those that are still on the inside, and your organization is a perfect example of helping people transition to spread the word on the inside.
Yeah, and these guys, they just have a realistic check. Like, go out to 220, contact me, send me a DM or whatever. And even if you're not even wanting to join the organization, or maybe we will and just let you in, I'm like just here to help you, but have a realistic conversation with yourself and just be like, don't go down the road and start unchecking boxes and then be like, what the hell's going on? And then lose the battle. That's one thing I was like, what were these dudes that actually commit suicide? What were they feeling 2 years prior to that? Is this what they were going through? And then it just cascades and ends in this. So I was like, that's a little too close to comfort for me. So if you're one of those guys, just reach out. I mean, you just have to open up. It's what we're dealing with.
Well, thank you for doing what you're doing, Rob. Why don't you give your socials out so people can get a hold of you?
Yep, Rob Hollingsworth on Facebook, LinkedIn, and then the Instagram handle for Plant Your Flag is Plant Your Flag Tribe. Links are in my profile on Linktree and etc. Send me a DM. I'll get back to you. I'm pretty responsive, but if I can help anybody out in any way, I'm here.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being here.
Yeah,
and thanks for being here for everybody else. And by the way, you don't, if you're having thoughts or you're having feelings, they're completely normal. I can't stand when people say it's okay to not be okay, but there's some truth to that. But you don't have to go to anybody specific. You don't have to go to Rob Hollingsworth. You don't have to go to Drew Breezy. You can tell your minister, you can tell your soccer coach or whoever, but for God's sakes, get that out of your system, get the toxicity out. Yep. Rob, thank you very much for being here. Good luck with Plant Your Flag. Hopefully it's going to blossom from here. For now, this is the rest of the story. I'm Drew Breezy. Thanks for tuning in to Failure to Stop. Don't forget to like, subscribe on our YouTube channel, and don't forget to patronize us on Patreon. Thanks.